Hey everyone, I'm working to hit 1,000 subscribers, and I need your help to get there. If you enjoy this content, please hit that subscribe button right now.
What's going on, Vikings Nation? Buckle up, because what I'm about to share with you today is going to make your blood boil. We've got bombshell reports dropping left and right about the Minnesota Vikings organization, and none of it is good. We're talking about Kevin O'Connell's secret influence over draft picks, ownership refusing to make changes despite a catastrophic season, and the very real possibility that JJ McCarthy is being set up to take the fall for an organizational disaster that has nothing to do with him. If you're tired of the same corporate PR nonsense from other Vikings channels and you want the unfiltered truth about what's really happening with your favorite team, you're in exactly the right place. Hit that subscribe button right now. Smash that like, and drop a comment telling me if you think the Wilf family has given up on holding anyone accountable in this organization. Let's dive into this absolute dumpster fire. Breaking news out of Minnesota that honestly shouldn't surprise anyone who's been paying attention, but it's still infuriating to hear confirmed. Kevin O'Connell has had massive influence over the Vikings draft process for the past several years. Multiple sources are reporting that KOC hasn't just been involved in draft discussions. He's been one of the primary decision makers when it comes to personnel. And you know what? This explains absolutely everything about why this team is in the position it's in right now. Let me be crystal clear about something. Anyone who thought Kevin O'Connell wasn't deeply involved in Vikings personnel decisions has been living in a fantasy world. This is the most influential person in the entire organization we're talking about. This is the guy whose representatives leaked that ridiculous story before the Week 18 game against Detroit last season, basically threatening that if he didn't get his contract extension, he could be traded. Does that sound like someone who doesn't have significant power and influence over every major decision this organization makes? Of course not. Kevin O'Connell is the single most important figure in the Vikings organization, more than any player, more than any other coach, and apparently more than the general manager who's supposed to be making these personnel decisions. His fingerprints are all over the draft picks, the free agent signings, the roster construction, and the overall direction of this franchise. And guess what? That direction has led this team straight off a cliff. If I had to create a pie chart showing who's most responsible for the Vikings being 4-8 this season and completely out of playoff contention, the biggest slice by far would have Kevin O'Connell's name on it. I know some of you are going to push back on this. I can already hear the comments. But Kelvin, he won Coach of the Year. He's the quarterback whisperer. He took the Vikings to the playoffs in his first season. Yeah, and what's happened since then? What have we seen when the training wheels came off and this organization was fully under his vision and control? For fans of other teams who might be watching this thinking, I've lost my mind, that I'm being too hard on a coach who's accomplished what he has in a short period of time, let me tell you something. You're not watching Vikings games week in and week out. You're not following this organization closely enough to understand the dysfunction that's happening behind the scenes. Kevin O'Connell has refused to adapt his offensive scheme despite having a rookie quarterback. He's had massive influence over draft picks that have been absolutely terrible. He's assembled a coaching staff that has failed to develop young talent. He's the common denominator in all of this organizational failure, and yet somehow he's completely untouchable. But here's where things get even more complicated. Kwesi Adofo-Mensah, the general manager, also deserves a massive amount of blame for what's happened here. The draft picks under his watch have been mostly disasters. The free agent signings haven't panned out. The overall roster construction has been questionable at best in accountability. But here's the thing that makes this situation so frustrating. Many of Kwesi's draft picks might actually have been good selections. The problem is that a coincidence. That's a development problem. That's a coaching problem. That's a Kevin O'Connell problem. Let's talk about Ed Ingram for a second, because this is the perfect example of what I thought the team needed to move on and find a new right guard. The coaching staff was even benching him in favor of Dalton Risner, which should tell you everything you need to know about how poorly they evaluated and developed him. Then Ed Ingram goes to the Houston Texans, and suddenly he's the sixth best guard in the entire NFL, according to Pro Football Focus. He's fourth in the league in run blocking. He's played over 600 snaps and been consistently excellent. Now, the Houston Texans don't exactly have a reputation for having dominant offensive lines. This isn't like he went to Philadelphia or San Francisco, where the line play is historically excellent. He went to Houston and immediately became one of the best guards in football. What does that tell you? It tells you that Ed Ingram was always talented. It tells you that Kwesi might have actually hit on that pick. It tells you that the Minnesota Vikings coaching staff, specifically offensive line coach Chris Cooper, completely failed to develop him and put him in position to succeed. And speaking of Chris Cooper, how does this man still have a job? How is he still the offensive line coach for the Minnesota Vikings? This guy is one of the worst offensive line coaches in the entire NFL. Under Kevin O'Connell's tenure, the Vikings have never had a consistently good offensive line despite having legitimate NFL talent on the roster. We've had Christian Darrisaw, who's one of the best young left tackles in football. We've had Brian O'Neill, a quality right tackle. We had Ed Ingram, who's now proving he's a quality guard. We had Garrett Bradbury, who's now the starting center for a Patriots team that's about to be the #1 seed in the AFC. Think about that for a second. Garrett Bradbury, a guy Vikings fans spent years complaining about, is now the starting center for a team that's better than the Chiefs, better than the Bills, better than the Ravens in the conference standings. Now, his Pro Football Focus grades aren't spectacular, but people who cover the Patriots closely say he's having a really good season. He's contributing to winning football. Meanwhile, the Vikings offensive line continues to be a problem, despite Chris Cooper being given talented players to work with. This all comes back to the fundamental issue with this organization. There's no accountability. The offensive line is a continuity position. It's about chemistry, communication, and consistent coaching. You need guys who understand the scheme, who work well together, who've been coached up properly. The Vikings have had the talent to have a good offensive line for years now, but the coaching and development have been so poor that these players either underperform in Minnesota or leave and immediately play better elsewhere. The Vikings need a complete organizational reset. They need to clean house. They need to fire Kevin O'Connell. They need to fire Kwesi Adofo-Mensah. They need to start fresh with a new vision and a new direction. But you know what? It's not going to happen. I am absolutely 100% confident that the Vikings will not make the sweeping changes that this situation demands. Why? Because we just got confirmation of exactly that. Ben Gosling, one of the most plugged-in Vikings reporters in the business, dropped a bombshell report about Kevin O'Connell and Kwesi's job security. He said, and I quote, "I mean, you've seen times where people get replaced because an ownership group has said, hey, this has been enough. I don't think that's a point we're at here. I mean, the coach and the GM were both extended before the season. There's a lot of commitment made to Kevin O'Connell and Kwesi Adofo-Mensah. I think they'll be here." Are you kidding me right now? The Vikings spent $350 million on this roster this year, the most cash spending of any team in the entire NFL. Just in this past free agency cycle alone, the Vikings spent the second most money in the league, trailing only the New England Patriots. They invested massive resources into making this team a contender, and the result has been a complete and total disaster. 4-8 out of playoff contention, shut out for the first time in 17 years, losing to teams they should beat, getting embarrassed on national television, and the response from ownership is, we're committed to these guys. This starts at the top. This starts with the Wilf family. I have tremendous respect for what the Wilfs have done for this organization. They've poured money into the team. They built a beautiful stadium. They've been willing to spend in free agency. They care about winning, or at least I thought they did. But what we're seeing now is an ownership group that's terrified of making bold decisions. They don't want to roll the dice. They don't want to take risks. They don't want to admit they made a mistake by extending Kevin O'Connell and Kwesi before the season even started. The Wilfs are okay with mediocrity. They're okay with running it back with the same leadership that just produced one of the most disappointing seasons in recent franchise history. They're okay with making no major changes, with keeping everyone employed, with hoping that somehow things magically get better next year without addressing any of the fundamental problems that got us here in the first place. That's not a recipe for success. That's a recipe for more of the same year after year after year. This is organizational malpractice. The Minnesota Vikings have gone from being one of the most respected and well-run organizations in professional sports to being one of the most dysfunctional. That's not hyperbole. That's not me being dramatic for effect. In the past 12 months, we've witnessed decisions and situations that would be laughable if they weren't so frustrating. The Vikings have always been a good organization, even if they've never quite reached greatness. But now we're reaching levels of dysfunction that I genuinely never thought I would see from this franchise, and it doesn't look like anything is going to change. That's the most depressing part of all of this. We're going to run it back with the same people making the same decisions that got us into this mess. And Vikings fans, the most loyal and long-suffering fan base in the NFL, are just expected to keep showing up, keep buying tickets, keep watching games, and keep believing that somehow it'll all work out. Now let's talk about what Kevin O'Connell said this week about JJ McCarthy, because this is where things get really concerning for the future of this franchise. At his press conference, KOC said this about McCarthy: "It's purely about decision-making this week. Play with an understanding of the decisions I make with the ball in my hand to protect himself and make sure that we can keep him in there." Reading between the lines here, it seems pretty clear that Kevin O'Connell is completely done with JJ McCarthy. He's throwing his rookie quarterback under the bus for the 100th time this season. And look, I'm not going to sit here and tell you that JJ McCarthy has played well this year. He hasn't. The Vikings are getting some of the worst quarterback play in the league. That's just objective reality. But what's also objective reality is that Kevin O'Connell has done absolutely nothing to help his young quarterback succeed. In fact, he's done the exact opposite. Let me show you some numbers that will blow your mind and perfectly illustrate the problem with Kevin O'Connell's coaching philosophy. These are KOC's run-pass splits over the last 4 seasons. In 2022, his first year as head coach with veteran Kirk Cousins at quarterback, the Vikings passed the ball 63% of the time. Okay, fine. You have a veteran quarterback, some shakiness on the offensive line, great weapons on the outside. I can live with a pass-heavy approach. In 2023, still with Kirk Cousins, they passed 63% of the time again. Same story, same approach. Then in 2024, you might think that with a rookie quarterback learning the position, KOC would have adjusted his philosophy significantly. He did adjust it slightly, passing the ball only 58% of the time. But here's where it gets absolutely insane. In 2025, with an even younger and less experienced quarterback in JJ McCarthy, the Vikings are passing the ball 59% of the time. That's an increase from last year. Let me repeat that. Kevin O'Connell is passing the football more this year than he did last year, despite having a quarterback with even less experience. This is one of the highest passing rates in the entire league. It's a complete joke. You have a young quarterback who's trying to develop, who's learning the position, who's dealing with the speed and complexity of the NFL game. And instead of making his life easier by establishing the run game and taking pressure off him, Kevin O'Connell is asking him to drop back and make plays in the passing game on nearly 60% of offensive snaps. Compare this to what we've seen from other head coaches with rookie quarterbacks. Look at what Ben Johnson has done with Caleb Williams in Chicago. Caleb hasn't been great this season. In fact, he has a worse adjusted completion percentage than JJ McCarthy. But you know what Ben Johnson did? He committed to running the football. He built an offensive identity around the run game. He gave his rookie quarterback easy completions and play action opportunities. He protected him from having to win games with his arm. And guess what? The Bears are winning games. There's no excuse for Kevin O'Connell refusing to change his offensive identity to suit his rookie quarterback's development. He still wants to be a drop-back passing team. He still wants explosive plays in the passing game. He's still trying to run the same offense he ran with Kirk Cousins, one of the most experienced and cerebral quarterbacks in the NFL, with a 22-year-old rookie who's barely played any professional football. What's even more frustrating is that Kevin O'Connell acknowledged on his weekly podcast with Paul Allen that the offense needs more explosive plays in the passing game, that they need more big plays. Really, that's your analysis of what's wrong with this offense. You've been trying to generate explosive passing plays all season long, and it clearly hasn't worked. So your solution is to just keep doing the same thing but somehow expect different results? That's the definition of insanity. This is a complete lack of self-awareness from the head coach. Kevin O'Connell cannot or will not see that his offensive philosophy is fundamentally incompatible with developing a rookie quarterback. He's tripling and quadrupling down on an approach that has failed over and over again this season. He refuses to adapt, refuses to change, refuses to do what's best for his young quarterback's development. And that's going to have catastrophic consequences for this franchise. Here's what I'm most worried about. This is a bad marriage between Kevin O'Connell and JJ McCarthy, and we're rapidly approaching a point where the organization is going to have to choose between them. Based on that report from Ben Gosling about KOC's job security, I'm convinced that the Vikings are going to choose Kevin O'Connell over JJ McCarthy. They're going to scapegoat the quarterback. They're going to say it was all JJ's fault. It was all Max Brosmer's fault. It wasn't Kevin O'Connell's fault, even though he's the common denominator in all of this dysfunction. I genuinely believe that JJ McCarthy won't be the starting quarterback for the Vikings next year. They're going to kick the tires on a guy they spent the 10th overall pick on. They're going to decide he's not the answer, and they're going to move on. They'll chalk it up as a draft miss, as a player development failure, as anything except what it really is, a coaching failure. Kevin O'Connell will escape accountability once again, and the Vikings will go out and trade for Mac Jones or sign some veteran quarterback in free agency. And you know what's going to happen? They'll win 10 games next year. They'll make the playoffs. Vikings fans will celebrate like we've accomplished something meaningful, and then we'll lose in the first round of the playoffs just like we always do, because you cannot win playoff games if you're a soft football team that doesn't run the ball and relies entirely on explosive plays in the passing game. That's the Kevin O'Connell way. Soft football, no commitment to the run game, banking everything on explosive plays and hoping your quarterback can make plays when protection breaks down. That approach works great in September, October, and November against mediocre teams. It can even work in some December games when weather isn't a factor. But when January rolls around, when you have to go into Chicago or Lambeau Field in below freezing temperatures and you're trying to win a playoff game, you better believe you need to be able to run the football and play physical, tough-nosed football. Kevin O'Connell's offense is built for fair weather football. It's built for indoor stadiums and perfect conditions. It's not built for the trenches, for grinding out tough yards, for imposing your will on the opponent when the weather turns nasty and the stakes are highest. That's why his offenses have consistently failed in the biggest moments. That's why this team quit on him after the Seattle loss. That's why his offensive players don't seem to care about how this season is going anymore. Meanwhile, on the other side of the ball, Brian Flores has his guys still playing hard. The defense hasn't quit. They're still flying around, making plays, giving maximum effort every single week. What's the difference? Leadership, accountability, a coach who adapts his scheme to his personnel and puts his players in position to succeed. Everything that Kevin O'Connell isn't doing on offense, Brian Flores is doing on defense. If the Vikings had any sense, if they were serious about winning, here's what they would do. Fire Kevin O'Connell and promote Brian Flores to head coach. Bring in a proven offensive coordinator, someone like Brian Daboll, who has experience developing young quarterbacks. Or maybe even make a run at Kevin Stefanski, who's done an incredible job in Cleveland despite having one of the worst quarterback situations in the league. Build an offensive identity around the run game in physical football. Actually commit to developing JJ McCarthy instead of setting him up to fail. But that's not going to happen. I can tell you with absolute certainty that the Wilfs believe in Kevin O'Connell. They believe in Kwesi Adofo-Mensah. They're going to run it back with the same leadership team that produced this disaster of a season. It's all sunshine and rainbows in Vikings land right now because the Wilfs are still making money. The stadium is still selling out. The revenue is still flowing in. Why rock the boat? Why make difficult decisions? Why hold anyone accountable when you can just keep collecting checks and hoping things magically improve? I'm getting sick and tired of it. I'm tired of the coach speak from Kevin O'Connell, where he dances around questions at press conferences and gives these incredibly long-winded answers that don't actually say anything. He does that deliberately, by the way. He gives these exhaustive, rambling responses so that he only has to answer 4 or 5 questions per press conference instead of getting peppered with tough questions that might force him to show some accountability. I'm tired of watching talented players underperform in Minnesota, and then go somewhere else and immediately look better. I'm tired of seeing draft picks fail to develop under this coaching staff. I'm tired of an offensive coordinator who refuses to adapt his scheme to his personnel. I'm tired of an ownership group that's too scared to make the tough decisions that might actually turn this franchise around. The Vikings are at a turning point right now. The decisions made this offseason will determine the trajectory of this franchise for the next 5 to 10 years. Do we commit to developing JJ McCarthy and building an offense that actually suits his skill set, or do we scapegoat the rookie quarterback, stick with Kevin O'Connell, and continue down this path of soft football and pass-heavy offense that consistently fails when it matters most? Based on everything we've heard from ownership in the front office, based on the job security that Ben Goessling reported, based on the complete lack of accountability after one of the worst losses in franchise history, I think we all know which path they're going to choose. And it's the wrong one. Kevin O'Connell needs to be held accountable. He's the most influential person in this organization. He's had massive input on draft picks. He's assembled the coaching staff. He's designed the offensive scheme. He's handled the quarterback development. All roads lead back to him, and all roads have led this franchise to one of its most disappointing seasons in recent memory. The buck stops with him, but somehow he's going to survive this disaster unscathed while everyone else takes the blame. This is Vikings football in 2025. Talented players, loyal fans, beautiful stadium, endless disappointment, and zero accountability for the people making the decisions. Some of you might think I'm being too harsh. Some of you might think I should give Kevin O'Connell more time, more chances, more opportunities to figure it out. But I've seen enough. I've watched this movie before. I know how it ends, and unless something dramatically changes, unless the Wilfs suddenly find some courage and make the hard decisions that need to be made, we're going to be having these same conversations next year and the year after that. All right, Vikings Nation, I need to know what you think about all of this. Get down in those comments right now and tell me, who deserves more blame, Kevin O'Connell or Kwesi Adofo-Mensah? Should the Vikings completely reset and fire everyone? Should they promote Brian Flores to head coach? Do you think JJ McCarthy is being set up to fail? Are you as frustrated as I am with this ownership group's refusal to make changes? Give me a Y for yes if you think the Vikings should fire everyone and start fresh. Give me an N for no if you think they should run it back with the current leadership. And if you made it all the way to the end of this video, you're an absolute legend. Drop a skull in the comments so I know you're ride or die for this channel. But before you go anywhere, you need to hit that subscribe button right now. We're pushing toward our next milestone, and I cannot do it without your support. If you want daily Vikings content that doesn't pull punches, that holds people accountable, that gives you the real story instead of corporate PR nonsense, this is your home. Hit that like button, turn on post notifications so you never miss when we drop new content, and share this video with every Vikings fan you know who's as frustrated as you are. This franchise deserves better. This fan base deserves better. JJ McCarthy deserves better. And until things change at the top, until the Wilfs decide they're serious about winning championships instead of just selling tickets, we're going to keep having these painful conversations. I'll see you in the next one, and hopefully by then we'll have some actual good news to talk about. Until then, keep your heads up, Vikings fans. S. Call.